Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The Unexpected Journey. Amara Brooks adjusted her scarf as she stepped into the bustling airport terminal. Her tailored suit, complemented by a subtle yet confident aura, drew attention without effort. She was a woman who had earned her success, CEO of a rising tech firm, mentor to countless young professionals, and a symbol of resilience. This trip marked a significant milestone, her first international conference as the keynote speaker, a position she'd fought tooth and nail to achieve. As Amara approached the check-in counter, the attendant greeted her with a warm smile. "Ms. Brooks, we've upgraded you to a VIP seat in first class," the attendant announced. Amara's smile widened. It was a rare moment of recognition for her hard work, a tangible symbol of the sacrifices she had made over the years. For once, she allowed herself to bask in the accomplishment. Boarding was smooth, and as she walked down the aisle to her seat, she noticed the stares, some curious, some admiring, and a few less welcoming. She was used to it. As a black woman navigating predominantly white spaces, Amara had become adept at brushing off the weight of judgment. But today, she was determined to enjoy the journey. Settling into seat 1A, she exhaled deeply. The soft leather of the chair seemed to embrace her, a stark contrast to the hectic weeks leading up to this moment. The hum of the engines, the faint rustle of passengers stowing their luggage, and the gentle murmur of conversations formed a soothing backdrop. Amara allowed herself to close her eyes, ready to enjoy a well-earned respite. Minutes later, a polite but firm voice broke through her tranquility. "Excuse me, ma'am." Amara opened her eyes to see a flight attendant standing beside her. The woman's professional smile faltered slightly as their eyes met. "Yes?" Amara responded, sitting up straighter. "I'm sorry to bother you, but we have a situation. Would you mind switching seats with another passenger? They'd be more comfortable up here." Amara blinked, processing the request. "I'm sorry, what kind of situation?" The attendant hesitated. "A passenger in the economy section is having some discomfort, and they'd prefer the extra space in first class." Amara frowned, glancing around the cabin. The other passengers were already settled, some watching the interaction with veiled curiosity. "I understand, but I paid for this seat, or rather, I was upgraded. Is there a specific reason I'm being asked to move?" The attendant shifted uncomfortably. "Well, the passenger in question feels that this seat would better suit them." Amara tilted her head, her voice steady but firm. "And who is this passenger?" The flight attendant hesitated before gesturing subtly toward a middle-aged white man standing awkwardly in the aisle. He avoided Amara's gaze, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Amara was stunned. The implications hung heavy in the air. Her mind raced with questions, but her instincts told her this wasn't merely about comfort. Was it her presence in this space that made him uncomfortable? She had encountered such microaggressions before, being questioned, doubted, or asked to accommodate others as if her success was a fluke rather than earned. "I'm sorry," Amara said, her voice calm but resolute. "I won't be moving. I have every right to this seat." The attendant's smile tightened. "I understand, but we're just trying to ensure everyone's comfort." "And what about mine?" Amara countered. Her voice remained measured, but there was steel behind her words. "I worked hard for this. I'm not moving." The tension in the cabin thickened. Passengers exchanged glances, some whispering among themselves. The man in question finally spoke, his tone clipped. "This is ridiculous. I don't see why she can't just move." Amara turned to face him fully. "Sir, I suggest you take this up with the airline if you're dissatisfied with your seat. But I will not be moving from mine." The man's face flushed, and he began to argue, but a sharp look from Amara silenced him. The flight attendant, sensing the growing unrest, excused herself to consult with her colleagues. Amara leaned back in her seat, her heart pounding. She had always been a fighter, but this was different. This was her sanctuary, her reward for years of struggle, and she wasn't about to let it be taken away. Minutes later, the flight attendant returned, accompanied by the head of the crew. The cabin grew quieter as passengers strained to hear the unfolding drama. "Ms. Brooks," the supervisor began, her tone measured but authoritative, "we understand your concerns, but we'd like to resolve this matter peacefully. Perhaps we can offer you a voucher as compensation?" Amara's gaze was unwavering. "I appreciate the offer, but I shouldn't have to give up my seat to resolve someone else's discomfort. This is about principle." The supervisor hesitated, clearly weighing her options. But before she could respond, a voice from the row behind Amara interrupted. "She's absolutely right. This is unacceptable." All heads turned toward the speaker, a younger white woman dressed in casual but stylish attire. Why should she have to move? If someone wants a first-class seat, they can pay for it like everyone else. A ripple of agreement spread through the cabin. Emboldened by the support, Amara felt a surge of determination. "This isn't just about me," she said, her voice carrying through the cabin. "This is about fairness and respect. I won't move because I don't want anyone else to feel like they have to shrink themselves to make others comfortable." The supervisor, sensing the growing backlash, finally relented. "You're right, Ms. Brooks. I apologize for the inconvenience. Please enjoy your flight." Amara nodded, her posture still stiff as the crew dispersed. The man grumbled under his breath as he returned to the economy section, his discomfort now irrelevant. As the flight continued, Amara couldn't shake the unease. She had stood her ground, but the incident felt larger than the moment. It was a microcosm of the systemic inequalities she had faced her entire life. And yet, it also reminded her of the power of resilience, of refusing to yield. What Amara didn't know was that this seemingly small act of defiance would soon spark a series of events far beyond the confines of that airplane. For her, it was a matter of principle. For others, it would become a rallying cry for justice. Amara Brooks reclined in her first-class seat, her pulse still steadying after the confrontation. The hum of the aircraft and the muffled voices of other passengers gradually returned to normal, but she could feel the occasional glances directed her way. It wasn't her intention to draw attention, but her refusal to yield had created a ripple in the still waters of complacency, and the ripples were only beginning to spread. She leaned her head back against the seat, her mind drifting to the countless moments in her life when she'd had to choose between standing her ground and stepping aside. Growing up in a small southern town, Amara had faced obstacles that had shaped her into the unyielding woman she was today. From being told as a young girl that her natural hair was unprofessional, to being passed over for promotions despite outperforming her peers, the journey to this first-class seat had been anything but smooth. A flight attendant came by offering champagne, but Amara declined with a polite smile. She wasn't in the mood to celebrate just yet. Instead, she pulled out her laptop, hoping to focus on her keynote speech for the conference. The theme of the event was innovation and leadership, and her story was meant to inspire others to challenge the status quo and carve their own paths. Little did she know, her next words would hold even greater weight after what had just transpired. As she typed, a shadow fell across her screen. She looked up to see the same young woman who had spoken up in her defense earlier. The woman smiled warmly, gesturing to the empty seat beside Amara. "Mind if I join you for a bit?" Amara nodded, surprised but curious. The woman settled in and extended her hand. "I'm Kate, by the way. Just wanted to say I thought what you did back there was amazing." "Thank you," Amara replied, shaking her hand. "I'm Amara." "I figured," Kate said with a chuckle. "I recognized you from one of your interviews. You're the CEO of Nexatech, right? The woman shaking up the tech industry?" Amara smiled modestly. "That's me." "Well, it's an honor to meet you," Kate said earnestly. "And honestly, seeing you stand up for yourself was refreshing. Too often, people just let things slide to avoid making waves. But you? You made a statement." Amara appreciated the sentiment, but she couldn't help feeling a twinge of frustration. "I wish it didn't have to be a statement," she admitted. "I wish it were just normal." Someone in my position shouldn't have to justify their presence in first class, or anywhere, for that matter. Kate nodded thoughtfully. You're right. But sometimes, making a statement is the only way to change what's considered normal. And trust me, people noticed. That guy's attitude was disgusting, and the crew's handling of it wasn't much better. You might not realize it yet, but what you did back there mattered. They chatted for a while longer, their conversation ranging from personal experiences to broader societal issues. Kate, a freelance journalist, revealed that she often wrote about social justice and systemic inequality. She was intrigued by Amara's story and asked if she could interview her for an upcoming piece. Amara hesitated but ultimately agreed, sensing that this moment might be an opportunity to amplify a much-needed conversation. The flight continued without further incident, but Amara's thoughts lingered on the confrontation. As the plane began its descent, she resolved to turn this experience into something meaningful. She didn't yet know how, but she felt a growing determination to ensure that no one else would feel the way she had been made to feel that day. When the plane landed and the passengers disembarked, Amara was surprised to find herself greeted by a small crowd in the terminal. Word of the incident had spread, thanks in part to Kate, who had posted a brief but powerful account of what had happened on her social media platforms. The post had gone viral within hours, with thousands of people sharing their support for Amara and condemning the blatant discrimination she had faced. Reporters flocked to her, cameras flashing and microphones thrust toward her face. Amara, unprepared for the sudden attention, kept her responses brief and focused on the broader issues at play. "This isn't just about me," she told them. "It's about the systemic biases that so many people face every day. No one should have to fight for their right to be treated with dignity and respect." Over the next few days, the story continued to gain traction. News outlets picked it up, framing it as a modern David and Goliath tale of a black woman standing up against discrimination. Public figures and celebrities weighed in, with many praising Amara for her courage and calling for greater accountability within the airline industry. The airline, under mounting pressure, issued a statement apologizing for the incident and promising to conduct a thorough review of its policies and training procedures. But for Amara, words weren't enough. She reached out to the airline's executives, demanding a meeting to discuss tangible steps they could take to address the deeper issues at hand. The meeting was tense, but productive. Amara outlined a series of initiatives aimed at fostering inclusivity and combating bias within the airline's operations, from comprehensive diversity training for staff to transparent protocols for handling customer complaints. To her surprise, the executives were receptive, acknowledging the need for change and committing to work with her to implement the proposed measures. Meanwhile, Kate's article about the incident was published and quickly became one of the most widely read pieces of the year. In it, she not only recounted Amara's experience, but also delved into the broader implications of systemic inequality, using the incident as a lens to examine the barriers faced by marginalized communities in every aspect of life. The article struck a chord with readers, sparking widespread discussions and calls for action. As the weeks went on, Amara found herself at the center of a growing movement. People from all walks of life reached out to share their own stories of resilience and resistance, inspired by her courage. Organizations invited her to speak at events and join initiatives aimed at promoting equity and inclusion. What had started as a single moment of defiance on an airplane had blossomed into a powerful platform for change. But it wasn't just about public advocacy for Amara. She also took a hard look at her own company, examining its policies and practices to ensure that Nexitech was truly living up to the values she championed. She worked with her team to launch a mentorship program for underrepresented groups in tech, providing opportunities for the next generation of innovators to thrive. In time, the incident became a pivotal chapter in Amara's life, a turning point that reminded her of the strength she carried within herself and the impact one voice could have when it refused to be silenced. And though the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, she faced it with renewed purpose and an unshakable resolve to keep pushing for a world where no one had to fight for their right to simply exist. As she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment, Amara realized that her fight wasn't just for herself, It was for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong, for everyone who had ever been made to feel small. And in that realization, she found not only strength, but also hope. The quiet hum of an airplane had once been the backdrop to an act of defiance that reverberated far beyond the confines of a cabin. Now, it was the melody of a movement, a reminder that even the smallest acts of resistance could create waves that touched countless lives. Amara Brooks had claimed her seat, not just in first class, but in the broader narrative of change, and she wasn't about to give it up. The weeks following the incident on the flight were a whirlwind for Amara Brooks. What had begun as a quiet moment of self-advocacy had snowballed into a full-fledged movement, a tidal wave of support, outrage, and dialogue sweeping across social media, news outlets, and corporate boardrooms. Amara had become an unwilling but resolute symbol of resistance against systemic bias, and she found herself navigating uncharted territory as she sought to balance her personal life, her professional responsibilities, and the unexpected role of being a voice for change. Despite the influx of attention, Amara made a conscious effort to stay grounded. She leaned on her closest friends and family, who offered unwavering support during what was quickly becoming the most tumultuous chapter of her life. Her mother, a retired teacher who had always been her greatest source of strength, reminded her to stay true to herself and her values. "You were born to lead, Amara," her mother told her one evening as they spoke over the phone. "But leadership isn't always glamorous. Sometimes it's about standing tall when others want you to sit down. You've always had that fire in you." Amara smiled at her mother's words, but she also felt the weight of them. The fire that had carried her through so many battles in her life now seemed to burn brighter than ever, and she was determined to channel it into something meaningful. One of the first steps she took was partnering with Kate, the journalist who had amplified her story. The two women began brainstorming ways to harness the momentum of the movement and turn it into lasting change. Together, they launched a campaign called Claim Your Seat, a multifaceted initiative aimed at empowering individuals from marginalized communities to challenge systemic inequities in all areas of life. The campaign's launch event, held at a packed community center in Atlanta, drew hundreds of attendees and thousands more tuning in via livestream. Amara stood at the podium, her voice steady and confident as she addressed the crowd. "Claiming your seat isn't just about a place on an airplane," she said, her gaze sweeping over the audience. "It's about claiming your right to be seen, heard, and respected. It's about refusing to let anyone tell you that you don't belong. And it's about standing together, because when we lift each other up, there's no limit to what we can achieve." The audience erupted into applause, their energy fueling Amara's resolve. For the first time, she felt a sense of clarity about her role in this movement. She wasn't just an accidental figurehead, she was a leader with a purpose. In the weeks that followed, the Claim Your Seat campaign gained traction, attracting attention from activists, organizations, and even major corporations. Amara and Kate worked tirelessly to expand the initiative, organizing workshops, creating educational resources, and advocating for policy changes. The campaign's reach extended beyond the United States, sparking similar movements in other countries where systemic biases and discrimination persisted. But with the spotlight came challenges. Amara faced backlash from certain corners of the internet, where critics accused her of overreacting or seeking attention. Anonymous trolls flooded her inbox with hateful messages, questioning her qualifications and mocking her appearance. While she had faced prejudice before, the intensity of the vitriol took her by surprise. One particularly tough day, as she scrolled through the barrage of negativity, Amara's resolve wavered. She closed her laptop and sat in silence, her thoughts racing. Was she really making a difference? Was it worth the personal cost? A knock on her office door broke her reverie. It was Marcus, her chief operating officer and one of her closest confidants at Nexatech. He stepped inside, holding a small stack of letters. "I thought you might need to see these," he said, setting the letters on her desk. "They're from people who've been inspired by your story." Amara picked up the first letter, her eyes scanning the heartfelt words. A young woman from Detroit wrote about how she had finally found the courage to confront her employer about workplace discrimination after hearing Amara's story. Another letter, from a high school student in Texas, detailed how Amara's resilience had inspired her to run for student council president despite being told she wasn't the right fit. By the time Amara finished reading the letters, her eyes were brimming with tears. She looked up at Marcus, who gave her an encouraging nod. "You're making a difference, Amara," he said. "Don't let the negativity drown out the voices of the people you're helping." Buoyed by the letters, Amara redoubled her efforts. She reached out to allies and collaborators, forming a coalition of advocates, policymakers, and thought leaders who shared her vision for a more equitable world. Together, they drafted a comprehensive policy proposal aimed at addressing systemic bias in industries ranging from aviation to technology. One of the key components of the proposal was the establishment of mandatory diversity and inclusion training for all employees in customer-facing roles. Amara had seen firsthand how unconscious biases could manifest in seemingly innocuous interactions, and she was determined to address the root causes of these behaviors. The coalition also called for greater transparency in corporate hiring practices, advocating for measures to ensure that opportunities were accessible to individuals from all backgrounds. Amara's experiences in the tech industry had shown her how systemic barriers could prevent talented individuals from reaching their full potential, and she was committed to breaking those barriers down. As the coalition's efforts gained momentum, Amara found herself invited to speak at conferences, universities, and even government hearings. Her voice carried weight, and she used it to shine a light on the systemic inequalities that too often went unaddressed. At one particularly high-profile event, Amara shared the stage with leaders from various industries. As she spoke about her experiences and the importance of creating inclusive spaces, she noticed a familiar face in the audience. It was the man from the airplane, the one who had demanded her seat. After her speech, the man approached her, his demeanor noticeably subdued. He extended a hand, his expression a mix of contrition and uncertainty. "Ms. Brooks," he began, "I want to apologize for my behavior on that flight. I didn't realize the impact of my actions." Amara studied him for a moment, her emotions a complex mix of vindication and compassion. Finally, she shook his hand. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. "But an apology is just the beginning. The real work comes in recognizing and challenging the biases we all carry." The man nodded, seemingly humbled by her words. As he walked away, Amara felt a sense of closure. The incident that had sparked a movement was now part of a larger narrative, one of growth, accountability, and hope. By the end of the year, the Claim Your Seat campaign had achieved milestones that Amara could never have imagined. Several major airlines had adopted the coalition's proposed policies, and other industries were beginning to follow suit. Amara's story had inspired countless individuals to take a stand, proving that even the smallest acts of resistance could create waves of change. But for Amara, the greatest reward wasn't the accolades or the headlines. It was the knowledge that she had used her platform to uplift others, to challenge the status quo, and to create a legacy of resilience and empowerment. As she sat in her office late one evening, reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, she felt a sense of peace. The fire within her still burned brightly, but it was no longer a solitary flame. It had become part of a larger blaze, a collective force for change that would continue to grow long after she was gone. And in that quiet moment, Amara Brooks knew she had truly claimed her seat, not just on an airplane, but in the world. Amara Brooks sat in her home office, her fingers lightly tracing the edge of her coffee mug as she stared at the computer screen before her. The headline on the screen read, "The Claim Your Seat Movement, How One Woman's Stand Sparked Global Change." The article, written by a renowned journalist, chronicled the ripple effect of her actions and the growing momentum of the campaign she had unintentionally birthed. Amara should have felt pride or even relief at the positive coverage, but instead, she felt an undercurrent of unease. With the movement growing larger than she'd ever anticipated, the stakes had risen exponentially, and so had the opposition. The weeks following the campaign's initial success had been both rewarding and grueling. The Claim Your Seat coalition had achieved significant victories, including the adoption of inclusive policies by several major airlines and corporations. However, as progress accelerated, so did resistance from those who viewed the movement as a threat to the status quo. Anonymous detractors flooded her inbox with criticism, while pundits debated her intentions on national television, accusing her of exploiting the incident for personal gain. Amara knew that change often came with resistance, but the sheer vitriol of the backlash sometimes left her questioning how much more she could endure. Her resolve, however, remained unshaken. She reminded herself of the letters from those who had been inspired by her journey, the people who now felt emboldened to stand up for themselves in their own lives. For them, she knew she had to press on. One morning, Amara received an unexpected call from a familiar voice. It was Kate, her journalist friend and co-founder of the Claim Your Seat campaign. The tone of urgency in Kate's voice was unmistakable. Amara, I just got word from one of my sources. There's an internal memo circulating within a major airline lobbying group. They're planning to push back against our campaign. It's not just talk, they're funding a smear campaign against you and the movement. Amara's chest tightened. She had anticipated resistance, but hearing it confirmed was another matter. What's the angle? She asked, her voice steady, despite the frustration simmering beneath the surface. They're framing it as an overreach, Kate explained. Claiming that the movement is unnecessary, that it's creating division where there wasn't any. They're using phrases like reverse discrimination and corporate overcorrection. They're also trying to paint you as an opportunist. Amara let out a slow breath, processing the information. We knew something like this might happen, she said finally. We'll respond, but not by stooping to their level. Let's double down on the facts and the stories that matter. Kate agreed, and the two women spent the rest of the day strategizing. They decided to launch a series of public testimonials from individuals who had benefited from the campaign's initiatives. These stories, raw and unfiltered, would underscore the real-world impact of Claim Your Seat. From single mothers who had found better job opportunities to young professionals who had secured leadership roles, the testimonials highlighted the transformative power of creating inclusive spaces. As the stories began to circulate, they struck a chord with audiences worldwide. The detractors' accusations of opportunism were quickly overshadowed by the undeniable evidence of the movement's positive impact. Yet, Amara remained cautious. She knew that winning public opinion was only one battle in a much larger war. Behind the scenes, she continued her work with the coalition, pushing for legislative changes that would solidify the movement's gains. This effort culminated in a historic meeting on Capitol Hill, where Amara and other advocates presented their case to a bipartisan group of lawmakers. The hearing was tense, with some politicians questioning the necessity of the proposed measures. One senator, a staunch opponent of the movement, challenged Amara directly. Ms. Brooks, while your story is compelling, I struggle to see how this movement addresses any systemic issue. Isn't this just an isolated incident that's been blown out of proportion? Amara met the senator's gaze, her voice calm but firm as she responded. With all due respect, Senator, this isn't just about one incident. It's about a pattern of exclusion, bias, and unequal treatment that countless people face every day. My story is just one example, but it represents something much larger. And the fact that we're having this conversation here today shows how urgently this issue needs to be addressed. The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. By the end of the hearing, several lawmakers expressed their support for the proposed measures, marking a significant step forward for the movement. But even as progress continued, Amara found herself grappling with the emotional toll of her newfound role. The constant scrutiny, the pressure to deliver results, and the responsibility of representing so many people weighed heavily on her. She confided in Marcus one evening as they worked late at Nexateca's headquarters. Sometimes I feel like I'm walking a tightrope, she admitted. One wrong step, and everything we've built could come crashing down. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. Leadership is always a balancing act, he said. But remember, you're not walking that tightrope alone. You've got a whole team, hell, a whole movement, behind you. And even if you stumble, we'll catch you. His words offered a small but meaningful comfort. Amara realized that she didn't have to shoulder the burden alone. She began delegating more responsibilities to her team, trusting them to carry the movement forward in ways that aligned with its mission. As the months passed, Claim Your Seat continued to evolve. The campaign expanded its reach, partnering with international organizations to address systemic biases on a global scale. Amara found herself traveling frequently, meeting with activists, policymakers, and corporate leaders in cities from London to Johannesburg. Each trip reinforced her belief that the fight for equity was universal, transcending borders and cultures. During one such trip to Nairobi, Amara visited a local community center where young girls were learning coding and robotics through a program funded by the campaign. Watching the girls work intently on their projects, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was what it was all about, breaking down barriers and creating opportunities for the next generation. Back in the United States, the movement reached another milestone with the passage of the Equity in Access Act, a piece of legislation inspired by the coalition's work. The act mandated stronger anti-discrimination policies in industries such as transportation, hospitality, and technology, as well as increased funding for diversity and inclusion initiatives. The victory was celebrated with a gala event attended by supporters and allies of the movement. As Amara took the stage to deliver a speech, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the tense confrontation on an airplane to the halls of Congress and beyond, every step had been a testament to the power of resilience and collective action. In her speech, Amara acknowledged the challenges that still lay ahead. "This isn't the end of the fight," she said. "It's just the beginning. But tonight, we celebrate how far we've come. We celebrate the lives we've touched, the barriers we've broken, and the future we're building together." The audience erupted into applause, their cheers echoing through the grand hall. For Amara, the moment was bittersweet. She knew that the work of dismantling systemic bias was far from over, but she also felt a deep sense of gratitude for the progress they had made. As the night wound down, Amara found herself standing on a balcony overlooking the city skyline. The lights of the city twinkled like stars, a reminder of the countless lives that made up the fabric of the movement. She thought of her mother's words, of the fire that had carried her through so many battles. That fire still burned brightly, and she knew it always would. For Amara Brooks, claiming her seat had been only the first step. Now, she was determined to ensure that everyone, no matter their background, would have the chance to claim theirs. And with every victory, every life touched, and every barrier broken, she knew they were one step closer to that vision. Amara Brooks stood before the massive crowd, her silhouette framed against the backdrop of the Washington Monument. The annual Voices for Equity rally had drawn thousands of people from across the country, and Amara had been invited to deliver the keynote address. The movement she had sparked, once confined to a single flight, had grown into a global force for justice, and this rally was its most visible expression yet. As Amara adjusted the microphone, she took a moment to absorb the scene. Faces of every age, race, and background stretched as far as she could see, their collective presence a testament to the power of solidarity. Signs bearing messages like "Equity Now," "Claim Your Seat," and "Together We Rise" swayed gently in the breeze. It was a sight that filled her with both pride and humility. Her speech that day was unlike any she had given before. It wasn't just about the journey she had taken or the victories the movement had achieved. It was about the road ahead and the responsibility they all shared to ensure the momentum didn't falter. "When we stand together," she began, her voice steady and resonant, "we are an unstoppable force. But our strength doesn't come from a single story or a single person. It comes from every voice in this crowd and every action, no matter how small, that challenges injustice and builds a better future." The crowd erupted into applause, their cheers carrying a palpable energy that bolstered Amara's resolve. But as she continued her speech, she knew the work was far from finished. While the Claim Your Seat movement had achieved remarkable milestones, the systemic issues they were fighting against remained deeply entrenched. Over the months leading up to the rally, Amara and the coalition had faced new challenges. The backlash from opposing groups had grown more sophisticated, with misinformation campaigns spreading false narratives about the movement's goals. Some argued that the push for equity was divisive, framing it as an attack on tradition or meritocracy. Others claimed that the changes being implemented were superficial and that deeper systemic reform was unrealistic. Amara, however, refused to be deterred. She had always believed that progress was a marathon, not a sprint, and she was prepared to keep running for as long as it took. Her team expanded their efforts to counter the misinformation, launching educational campaigns and partnering with grassroots organizations to foster dialogue in communities that had been skeptical of the movement. One of the coalition's most significant initiatives during this time was the Equity Leadership Fellowship, a program designed to empower young leaders from underrepresented backgrounds. The fellowship provided mentorship, training, and resources to individuals who wanted to drive change in their own communities. Amara took a personal interest in the program, often mentoring fellows herself and sharing lessons from her own journey. Among the first cohort of fellows was a young woman named Tasha, whose story resonated deeply with Amara. Tasha had grown up in a small, underserved town, where opportunities were scarce, and dreams often felt out of reach. Despite these challenges, she had excelled academically and become the first in her family to attend college. Her determination reminded Amara of her own path, and she saw in Tasha a spark that could light the way for others. Tasha, in turn, found inspiration in Amara's story and leadership. Under Amara's guidance, she developed a project aimed at increasing access to technology education in rural communities. The project quickly gained traction, and Tasha's work became a model for other fellows in the program. Watching Tasha flourish was one of the most rewarding experiences of Amara's career, a reminder of why she had taken on this fight in the first place. But it wasn't just the fellows who inspired Amara. The movement continued to grow in unexpected ways, with everyday people finding their own ways to contribute. Teachers incorporated lessons about systemic inequality into their curriculums. Artists created powerful works that captured the spirit of the campaign. Even businesses that had initially been resistant began to adopt more inclusive practices, recognizing the benefits of diversity not just as a moral imperative, but as a driver of innovation and growth. As the movement expanded, so did Amara's responsibilities. She found herself juggling her role as CEO of Nexitech with her work as a leader of the Claim Your Seat campaign. The demands of both were intense, and there were moments when she felt stretched to her limit. But she also knew that both roles were interconnected. At Nexitech, she was implementing many of the principles she advocated for in the movement, creating a workplace culture that prioritized equity and inclusion. Her team at Nexitech became one of her greatest sources of support. Marcus, her COO, continued to be a trusted confidant, helping her navigate the complexities of balancing her dual roles. The company's employees, many of whom had been drawn to Nexitech because of its values, often participated in the campaign's initiatives, further blurring the lines between Amara's professional and advocacy work. One evening, as she prepared for yet another cross-country trip, Amara received a call that reminded her of the deeply personal nature of the work she was doing. It was from a woman named Clara, an older Black woman who had experienced discrimination in the workplace for most of her career. Clara had followed Amara's journey closely and wanted to share how the movement had impacted her. "I just wanted to thank you," Clara said, her voice filled with emotion. "For years, I stayed quiet, thinking it was easier to just accept things the way they were. But seeing you stand up for yourself, it gave me the courage to do the same. I spoke up at work last month, and for the first time, I felt like my voice mattered." Amara felt a lump rise in her throat. It was moments like this that reminded her of the human impact of the movement, the lives touched and the barriers broken. As the rally in Washington drew to a close, Amara joined hands with her fellow speakers on stage, their united front a powerful symbol of the collective effort that had brought them to this moment. The crowd's chants of equity now echoed through the air, a rallying cry that seemed to vibrate through Amara's very core. Later that night, as she sat alone in her hotel room, Amara allowed herself a rare moment of reflection. She thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the small-town girl who had dared to dream big to the woman who had claimed her seat in the face of adversity. She thought about the people who had supported her, the voices that had joined hers, and the countless others who would carry the movement forward. She knew the road ahead would not be easy. There would be setbacks, resistance, and moments of doubt. But she also knew that the foundation they had built was strong, and the fire within her was far from extinguished. As she looked out at the city lights, Amara felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the challenges that had shaped her, the people who had inspired her, and the opportunities she had seized to make a difference. She understood now that claiming her seat had never been just about herself. It was about creating a world where everyone had a seat, where everyone's voice mattered, and where equity was not just a goal, but a reality. And in that quiet moment, Amara made a promise to herself, to keep fighting, to keep building, and to never stop believing in the power of collective action. Because the journey wasn't over, not for her, not for the movement, and not for the countless lives still waiting to be transformed. Together, they would keep moving forward, one step, one voice, one seat at a time.